Alexander Vance was a man who solved problems with contracts and zeros. But the night a homeless girl handed him a lost diamond ring, he discovered a problem money couldn't fix: his own obsession. Vance built a $60 billion empire from a single algorithm. She was sleeping in a doorway 3 blocks from his penthouse. Their worlds were never meant to touch. But when she returned the one thing he thought he'd lost forever, it sparked a single, terrifying question. What happens when the most powerful man in the city decides the most vulnerable woman in it belongs to him? Alexander Thorne Vance III didn't acquire wealth, he extracted it. His algorithm Chimera didn't predict market trends, it created them, moving capital like a god moving chess pieces on a board no one else could see. His penthouse wasn't a home. It was a command center 68 stories above Manhattan, all cold marble, floor-to-ceiling glass, and the profound silence that only absolute money can buy. He had security, assistants, chefs, but no friends. Relationships were assessed for utility. His fiancée, Celeste Whitlock, was the daughter of a media magnate, a merger disguised as a romance, photographed at galas and perfectly choreographed for the Wall Street Journal. The ring was hers, a 7-carat Astur-cut diamond set in platinum, a prop in their performance. He'd taken it to be resized, a trivial errand in a day of billion-dollar arbitrage. He didn't even notice it was gone until his driver, Leo, mentioned the empty velvet box in the back of the Bentley. Vance dismissed it. A thing was lost. He would buy another thing. It was Tuesday. Her name was Ilara, no last name on any record she carried. She was 22. The night the ring fell from Vance's pocket onto the rain-slicked pavement of East 57th Street, she was huddled in the recessed doorway of a shuttered bank, using a broken umbrella as a windbreak. Her world was measured in blocks, in the opening times of soup kitchens, in the wary assessment of every passing shadow. The statistics are clinical but horrifying. Nearly 40% of the homeless population are women, and for half of them, violence is what put them on the street. Ilara's story was a common tragedy: a foster system shuffle, an aged-out graduation into poverty, a boyfriend who turned possessive then violent. She ran to survive, and the street, while merciless, was at least a threat she could see coming. She found the ring at dawn, a glittering incongruity in the grey grit. To her, it wasn't a symbol of love. It was a month in a warm room. It was food that didn't come from a can. It was safety. The temptation to pawn it must have been a physical ache. But Ilara had a code, a stubborn filament of integrity that life hadn't yet managed to snap. The ring was in a distinctive black box with the name of a jeweler on Madison Avenue. She walked. Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Vance was unraveling, not over the diamond, but over the *loss*, the carelessness of it, the *floor*. In his world, data didn't get lost, assets didn't vanish. The unexplained absence was a glitch in his reality, a tiny, persistent itch in his otherwise perfectly controlled universe. He had his head of security, a former Special Forces operative named Jax, review every frame of surveillance from the car and the building. Nothing. The ring had simply ceased to exist. This was unacceptable. Ilara arrived at the jeweler's just as they opened. The manager, recognizing the box and the client it belonged to, paled. He called Vance's office immediately. Vance wasn't available, his assistant said. The manager, sweating, explained a young woman had the Morty ring. There was a pause, then the assistant's voice, crisp and cold. "Hold her, Mr. Vance is sending someone." Ilara waited in a plush chair, feeling like a stain on the velvet. She expected a check, maybe $500. A reward would change everything. Instead, the door opened and Jax walked in. 6'4", eyes that missed nothing. He didn't smile. "Mr. Vance would like to thank you in person." It wasn't an invitation, it was an extraction. This was the first miscalculation. Vance, in his sterile logic, wanted to see the variable that had disrupted his equation, to look at the person who had acted outside the predictable models of human greed. He expected a sob story, a calculated play for a bigger payout. He was preparing to be mildly amused, then dismissive. Jax brought Ilara to the private elevator that went directly to the penthouse. The ride was silent. The doors opened not into a lobby, but into Vance's living room. The view was vertiginous, a panorama of the city laid bare. Ilara didn't look at the view. She stood on the immaculate white rug, her worn sneakers leaving faint damp marks, her oversized coat smelling of rain and subway tunnels. She was trembling, but her chin was up. Vance stood by the window, silhouetted against the skyline. He turned. He saw a girl, yes, thin, pale, dark circles under eyes that were too old for her face. But he also saw the way she held herself, not with the cowering deference he was used to, but with a weary, unbroken dignity. And he saw the ring box, clutched tightly in her chapped, red hands. "Let me see it," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the space. She opened the box. The diamond caught the cold morning light, firing off sparks against the gray sky. Vance didn't look at the ring. He kept his eyes on her face, on the utter lack of avarice in her expression as she looked at a stone worth more than she would ever earn in her lifetime. "Why?" he asked, a single blunt word. Ilara met his gaze. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear, "Because it wasn't mine." In that moment, Alexander Vance's meticulously ordered world cracked. Here was an action with no logical profit motive, an algorithm of pure, irrational integrity. It was a foreign code. It was fascinating. It was the first thing in years he couldn't immediately quantify, and therefore, the first thing that truly held his interest. He took the box. "What's your name?" "Ilara." "Where do you live, Ilara?" She didn't answer. The shame was answer enough. Vance made a decision. It felt to him like solving a problem. "Jax will take you downstairs. He'll get you a room at the plaza for the week. Order whatever you need from room service. We'll talk about a suitable reward tomorrow." Ilara shook her head, a quick, frantic motion. "No, I don't. I can't go to a hotel like this. A reward is fine, just cash is fine." Her refusal was the second anomaly. She was rejecting luxury. She was afraid of it. Vance's interest sharpened from curiosity into something more possessive. This variable needed to be studied, protected, controlled. "It's not a request," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's the most efficient solution. You're exhausted. You need security. The hotel provides it. Jax." Jax stepped forward, a silent command. Ilara, overwhelmed, outmaneuvered, and desperately tired, allowed herself to be led back to the elevator. Vance watched them go. He then picked up his phone and called his assistant. "I need a full background workup on an Ilara, no known surname. Homeless, likely late teens or early 20s. Use all channels. I want it by morning." He ended the call and walked to the window, looking down at the ant-like traffic. The ring was on his desk, forgotten again. He wasn't thinking about the diamond. He was thinking about the look in her eyes when she said, "Because it wasn't mine." It was a code he needed to decrypt, a problem he now owned. Down at the plaza, in a suite that cost more per night than her entire previous year, Ilara sat on the edge of a bed softer than any cloud she could imagine, and she cried, not from gratitude, but from a profound, instinctive terror. The door was locked. The world outside was silenced, but she felt more trapped than she ever had in that cold doorway. The walls weren't keeping danger out, they were keeping her in. And at that same moment, across the city, Vance's fiancée Celeste was staring at a grainy photo on her phone, sent by a concerned friend who'd seen a disheveled girl being ushered into Vance's private elevator. The caption read, "New pet project, darling." Celeste's smile was thin and cold. She had spent years sculpting herself into the perfect counterpart for a man like Vance. She understood transactions. She did not understand stray girls being brought into the penthouse. This was not part of the merger agreement. The stage was set, the powerful man intrigued and possessive, the vulnerable woman trapped by a kindness that felt like a gilded cage, and the rival watching from the shadows, sensing a weakness to exploit. All it would take was one spark, and that spark came the very next morning when Jax placed a preliminary background report on Vance's desk. Vance skimmed it, his eyes stopping on a single, buried line, a name from a sealed juvenile record, a connection he never could have modeled. Ilara wasn't just a random homeless girl. She was the daughter of the only man who had ever beaten Alexander Vance in a deal, a man who had died in prison, bankrupt and broken, 8 years ago. Vance leaned back in his chair, the report falling from his hands. A slow, chilling smile touched his lips. This wasn't an anomaly anymore. This was fate, and he had just found his new favorite game. Vance didn't see a victim of his past. He saw a masterpiece he'd unknowingly begun years ago, now returned to him for finishing. Ilara Finch, daughter of Thomas Finch, the Steel King of Pittsburgh, a man of old money and older pride who had laughed at Vance's first hostile takeover attempt 20 years ago. The war that followed was brutal, short, and utterly decisive. Vance used Chimera to manipulate commodities futures, triggering a cascade of margin calls that obliterated Finch's empire in 72 hours. Thomas Finch was indicted for fraud, a charge Vance's legal team had carefully engineered, and hung himself in his study before sentencing. The family and their legacy evaporated. And Ilara, then 14, had fallen through the cracks of the system, a piece of human debris from Vance's first major conquest. The symmetry was perfect, beautiful, even. This wasn't charity. This was reclamation, a correcting of the universe's ledger. He didn't tell her not yet. Information was a tool, and you never showed your opponent the blueprint. Instead, he escalated. The week at the plaza became indefinite. He replaced her donated clothes with a curated wardrobe delivered by a personal shopper, simple, expensive cashmere and cotton, nothing that would frighten her. He assigned Jax not just as security, but as a permanent shadow. For her safety, Vance declared, every meal was provided, every outing was planned and vetted. Ilara's life, from the temperature of her room to the books left on her nightstand, was now a product of Vance's design. To the outside world, he spun a tale of philanthropic duty. A press release from Vance Capital announced a new private initiative for urban youth in transitional crises, with a carefully cropped photo of Vance looking thoughtful. The financial blogs ate it up. Celeste saw right through it. At a dinner at Cipriani, she leaned across the table, her voice a velvet dagger. An entire foundation for one stray Alexander, that's not philanthropy. That's a tax-deductible fetish. Vance merely sipped his wine. You're emotional, Celeste. It's unbecoming. But Ilara wasn't a passive doll. The initial shock of luxury was wearing off, replaced by a deep, humming claustrophobia. The suite felt like a sensory deprivation tank lined in silk. She missed the noise, the dirty air, the terrible freedom of the street. One afternoon, she tried to leave for a walk in Central Park. Jax appeared in the hallway, calm and immovable. Mr. Vance prefers you use the hotel's private car service for any excursions. For your safety, I can arrange it now. She went back to her room, her heart pounding. The door hadn't been locked, but the walls had moved closer. She began to fight back in the only ways she could. She refused the meals, ordering cheap takeout with the cash she'd saved from her old life. She stacked the designer clothes in a corner, wearing her own worn jeans and hoodie. Vance monitored it all through Jax's reports. Her defiance didn't anger him, it excited him. It proved her spirit, the very thing he wanted to possess. He upped the ante. He visited her, not in the hotel, but at a quiet, exclusive restaurant on the Upper East Side. He told the maitre d' to seat them in the secluded garden terrace. Ilara, ushered in by Jax, looked like a hostage at a tea party. Sit, Vance said, not unkindly. You need to eat something that isn't from a cardboard container. Why am I here, Mr. Vance? She asked, not touching the water glass. Alexander, and you're here because I'm investing in you. I'm not a stock. Everything is a stock, he replied, cutting into his steak. Some assets are just undervalued. Your integrity, your resilience, they're rare commodities. I'm simply providing the environment for them to appreciate. Ilara stared at him. You're talking about me like I'm a building. You are a project, he stated matter-of-factly, a far more interesting one than mergers or algorithms. I'm going to rebuild you, Ilara, give you an education, a purpose, a life worthy of your potential. He almost said lineage asterisk. The sheer, unvarnished audacity of it took her breath away. He wasn't offering help, he was offering ownership. And if I don't want to be rebuilt? Vance smiled, a thin curve of his lips. What do you want? To go back to the doorway? To freeze next winter? You have trauma, Ilara. You're making decisions from a place of fear and lack. I'm offering to remove the lack. Then we'll see what you really want. It was a psychological trap, perfectly laid. He was reframing her desire for autonomy as a symptom of her poverty, a bug in her system to be fixed. That night back at the plaza, Ilara did something she hadn't done since she was a child. She got down on her knees and prayed, not to God, but to the ghost of her father, a man she remembered as broad-shouldered and warm, who'd crumbled into a silent, broken ghost before the end. What do I do? The silence that answered was absolute. Driven by a new desperation, she used the hotel's business center computer when Jax was changing shifts. She Googled Alexander Vance. The headlines were a waterfall of wealth and power. Then she saw it. An archived article from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette dated over a decade ago, Finch Steel Collapse, a tale of modern ruthlessness. She clicked. There was her father's face, proud and smiling in an older photo, and there was Vance, younger, sharper, standing outside a courthouse. The article detailed the takeover. It used words like predatory and systematic dismantling. It mentioned the suicide. The room spun, the air left her lungs. The man who owned the air she breathed, the bed she slept in, the food she ate, was the man who had destroyed her father. This wasn't fate. This was a sick joke, or worse, a deliberate move in a game she couldn't see. Was this his revenge on the Finch bloodline, to lift her up just to watch her fall, or did he truly not know who she was? Paranoia and clarity became the same thing. She couldn't run, Jax would find her. She couldn't stay ignorant. She had to know his endgame, so she made a decision. She would play along. She would let him be her architect, and she would search for the blueprint. The next morning, when Vance sent a tutor to begin her educational assessment, Ilara was compliant, pleasant even. Vance, reviewing the report, felt a surge of triumph. The asset was appreciating. He began including her in his world, small things at first, a drive in the Bentley where he pointed out buildings he owned, a visit to a modern art gallery where he bought a painting she glanced at for a moment too long. He was teaching her his language, the language of acquisition. Celeste watched this courtship of a pauper with icy fury. Her father, the media magnate, warned her, "The man is publicly humiliating you, Celeste. He's making you a laughingstock. If he wants to keep his little urchin, fine, but the merger is off unless he cleans up this mess." Celeste wasn't ready to give up her throne. She hired a private investigator, a discreet woman named Mona, who specialized in digging up dirt on the rich. "I don't want financials," Celeste instructed. "I want her, every secret, every weakness, every ugly little truth." Meanwhile, Ilara, now a seemingly willing student, asked Vance questions, tentative at first, then more pointed. "How did you know you'd win against your first big competitor?" she asked one evening in his library, a fire crackling. Vance, enjoying the role of mentor, swirled a brandy. "I knew because I understood his weakness. He was sentimental. He thought legacy was about history. I showed him it's about the future." He broke. "Did he have a family?" Vance's eyes flickered to her, a hunter sensing a shift in the wind. "He did. They faded away. That's what happens. Weakness compounds." The coldness of it chilled her to the bone, but she nodded, as if absorbing a lesson. A week later, using a burner phone she bought with cash from a street vendor during a heavily supervised outing, Ilara called the one person from her old life she semi-trusted, a volunteer nurse named Gina from the soup kitchen. She met her in a crowded Starbucks, Jax watching from the Bentley at the curb. "I need you to find someone for me," Ilara whispered, sliding a folded napkin with a name, Daniel Porter. He was her father's old lawyer. "Tell him Ilara Finch needs to talk." About Pittsburgh. The game was now three-layered. Vance, sculpting his living monument, Ilara searching for the truth beneath the marble, and Celeste sharpening a knife in the dark. The collision point arrived from an unexpected angle. Mona, Celeste's investigator, struck gold not with Ilara's past, but with Vance's present. She bribed a clerk at the hotel. She got access to logs, to service records, and she found a discrepancy. A series of late-night encrypted data transfers from Vance's personal server to a secure terminal in the plaza. In Ilara's suite, it wasn't communication, it was monitoring. Audio, visual, biometric data from sensors she'd never known were in the walls. Vance wasn't just housing her, he was data mining her, her sleep patterns, her heart rate, her conversations with the maid. Celeste had her weapon. It wasn't a scandal of illicit romance. It was a scandal of inhuman control, of billionaire predation dressed up as charity. She took the evidence to her father. "We burn him," she said. But her father, a veteran of wars, saw further. "We don't burn him, we leverage him. This makes him vulnerable. We use it to get a better deal. You will still be Mrs. Vance, but on our terms." Celeste agreed. She arranged a meeting with Vance at his penthouse. She laid the evidence out on his desk like a surgeon laying out scalpel. "You have a choice, Alexander. You publicly dismiss the girl, send her to some nice, faraway college with a trust fund, and you announce our wedding date next week, or this data goes to the Times, they'll call you a monster, your investors will flee, Chimera won't save you from that kind of heat. Vance listened, his face a mask of granite. He looked from the evidence to Celeste's triumphant face. Then he did something she didn't expect. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You think this is my weakness?" he said. "This is my research. You're threatening to expose the methodology. It would be like Tesla being shamed for taking notes." "You're not Tesla. You're a man who spies on a homeless girl," Celeste snapped. "And she is the daughter of Thomas Finch," Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Did your investigator tell you that?" Celeste's confidence faltered. The name meant something, a old, bad story. "I'm not hiding her, Celeste. I'm restoring her. It's a narrative, a redemption arc for the Vance legacy. The man who builds up the daughter of the man he tore down. The press will weep. And you," he stood up, looming over her, "you will stand beside me and smile. You will be the gracious, compassionate fiancé supporting this beautiful mission. Because if you try to burn me, I will show the world how you knew about your father's offshore accounts hiding his tax fraud. I will sink your entire family. The merger is still on, but the narrative is now mine." Celeste left, white-faced and defeated. Vance had turned her attack into another strand of his control web. He felt invincible. But down in the Bentley, Ilara was receiving a message on her burner phone. It was from Gina. "Daniel Porter agreed to talk. He's scared. He says he has a box your father left with him. He says you were right to be suspicious. It wasn't just business, it was personal." Ilara's hands shook as she read the text. Jax, in the front seat, watched her in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, Miss Finch?" he asked, using the name Vance had finally revealed to her just days before, another piece of his grand design falling into place. "Yes," she lied, her blood running cold. He'd called her Finch, not Ilara, Finch asterisk. The project had a name now, the blueprint was becoming clear, and as the car glided through the city, she realized the terrifying truth. She wasn't escaping a gilded cage. She was being moved to the center of the labyrinth, and the man who built it knew every turn, every dead end, but he didn't know she'd just found a map. The meeting with Daniel Porter was set in the last place anyone would look for a disgraced corporate lawyer, a noisy, family-style pizzeria in Queens. Ilara got there by creating a diversion. She pretended to have a migraine, convincing Jax to wait in the car outside a pharmacy while she just needed air and an aspirin. She slipped out the back door, heart hammering, and took the subway, losing herself in the rush hour crowd. Porter was a ghost of a man, thinning hair, glasses mended with tape, smelling of mothballs and regret. He clutched a battered leather satchel to his chest. When he saw her, his eyes widened. "You look like him," around the eyes. "What's in the box, Mr. Porter?" Ilara asked, skipping any preamble. He gestured for her to sit. "Your father gave this to me a week before he died. He said if anything happened to him, or if you ever came asking, I should give it to you. He paid me $5,000 in cash to forget I had it." Porter slid the satchel across the sticky table. "I'm sorry for everything." Ilara opened the satchel. Inside was a sealed plastic container. Within that, files, photographs, a small digital voice recorder, and a handwritten letter addressed to her. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "My dearest Ilara, if you're reading this, I have failed you in the final way. Do not believe what they say about me. What happened was not a business loss. It was a theft. Alexander Vance didn't just want my company. He wanted to erase me. He discovered my one secret, the one I thought buried forever, and he used it as a lever to break everything." The secret was there in black and white. Thomas Finch hadn't just been a steel magnate. In his youth, desperate for capital, he had been a silent minority partner in a network of illegal casinos run by a mid-level crime family. It was a brief, foolish alliance, long since severed and laundered through legitimate investments. But the paper trail existed. Vance had uncovered it. "He didn't just blackmail me with it," the letter continued. "He gave me a choice. A public, humiliating downfall followed by prison, or a quiet exit that would leave you and your mother with the life insurance intact. I chose the quiet exit. I am so sorry. But know this, Vance didn't stop there. The man has a pattern. He finds a hidden weakness and uses it not just to win, but to consume. He will not stop until he owns everything his target ever loved. He is not a businessman." He is a vampire in a suit. If he ever finds you, run." Beneath the letter were financial records, not of her father's company, but of Vance's, complex coded transfers. Porter, his voice barely a whisper, pointed a shaking finger. "After your father's death, I was angry. I did some digging of my own. Those transfers, they go to shell companies, but I traced one. It's a private psychiatric institute in Switzerland, specializing in behavioral conditioning for high-net-worth clients with problematic family members." A cold, slick dread poured down Ilara's spine. "What are you saying?" "Vance doesn't just collect companies, Miss Finch. He collects people. He breaks them, then he remodels them to be loyal, to be dependent, to be whatever he needs. Your father believed Vance's ultimate goal was to acquire a human being as flawlessly as he acquired a stock. A perfect, obedient asset. I think you are his next project." The world narrowed to the smell of grease and the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. The why of it all crystallized with horrifying clarity. The hotel, the clothes, the tutors, the monitoring. It wasn't philanthropy. It wasn't even a twisted form of atonement. It was procurement. He was tenderizing his new asset. Her defiance, her trauma, her very identity, it was all just data for his algorithm of control. She had to run, now, but as she stood up, Porter grabbed her wrist, his eyes desperate. "He owns the judges, the police, the politicians. You can't just run, you need to destroy him. The voice recorder, it's my insurance. It's a conversation I had with a private investigator Vance hired years ago. The man was digging for dirt on your father, but he got sloppy drunk. He implied Vance's orders were very specific. Find the thing he loves most and show me how to take it." The investigator thought he meant the company. "I think he meant you." Ilara took the satchel. She had no plan, only a terrifying new truth. She made it back to the pharmacy, her face pale, just as Jax was starting to pace. "Migraine's worse," she mumbled, and he nodded, his expression unreadable. But as he held the car door open for her, his eyes lingered on the cheap tote bag she now carried alongside her designer purse. He said nothing. Back at the plaza, paranoia was a live wire under her skin. She hid the satchel in the hollow space behind a removable air vent in the closet. She felt sure the room was watching her, listening. That night, Vance summoned her to the penthouse for dinner. Alone. The table was set for two, candles. He was pouring wine when she entered. "Ilara, you look tired. The city's still overwhelming you." "It's a lot," she said, forcing her voice steady. He studied her as she sat. "Jax mentioned an unscheduled stop today. A pharmacy back door leads to a subway line, an interesting route for a headache." The air left the room. Ilara's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "I felt claustrophobic. I needed to walk, alone." "Of course," Vance said, his tone smooth. "Independence is important, but safety is paramount, you understand. A project of this value requires certain safeguards." He took a sip of wine. "I've made a decision. The hotel is temporary. I want you to move into the penthouse. There's a suite on the east wing. You'll have your own space, but we can work more closely. Your education is accelerating." It was the next logical step in his acquisition, full assimilation. She was being moved from the holding tank to the main exhibit. Refusal was impossible. It would trigger a full containment protocol. She had to play for more time. "When?" she asked, her voice small. "Tomorrow," he said, a smile touching his lips. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of a chess master moving his queen into position. That night, Ilara didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the hidden sensors. The walls of the labyrinth were closing in. She had a weapon, the satchel, but no way to wield it. Going public would be a circus, and Vance's legal team would shred Porter and dismiss the evidence as the ravings of a broken man. She needed leverage he couldn't buy or bury. Her thoughts turned to the one person who hated Vance as much as she now did, Celeste. It was a desperate, dangerous alliance, but it was the only card she had left. The next morning, as Jax supervised the packing of her few belongings, Ilara used a moment of pretended distress to get a maid alone in the bathroom. She scribbled a note on a piece of toilet paper, wrapped a $100 bill around it, and pressed it into the woman's hand. "Get this to Celeste Whitlock. You know who she is. There's 1,000 more if you do." The maid's eyes widened, but she pocketed the note and the money. It was a fragile thread of hope. The move to the penthouse was a study in silent horror. Her new suite was breathtaking, a sun-drenched space with a private terrace. It was also a golden prison with a higher security rating. The doors used biometric locks keyed to her and Vance. The windows were unopenable, 24-inch thick ballistic glass. Jax's post was now directly outside her door. Vance, however, was in a magnanimous mood. He gave her a tour, pointing out his favorite books in the library, the temperature-controlled wine cellar. He was playing Father, Benefactor, God. This is your home now, Ilara. Everything you see, it's all part of your inheritance. The word *inheritance hung in the air, toxic and double-edged. He was giving her back a sliver of the world he'd stolen. 2 days passed in a tense, quiet routine. Then, a break. Vance was called away unexpectedly to Washington for a Senate subcommittee hearing, a mere formality for a man of his influence, but it required his physical presence. He would be gone for 36 hours. Jax would be with him. For the first time, Ilara was alone in the penthouse with only the regular staff. And that afternoon, a delivery arrived. A box from a high-end florist. Inside, nestled in orchids, was a single unmarked key and a card that read, Storage Locker 734, Grand Central Terminal, 9 p.m. tonight. Come alone or don't. See. Celeste had taken the bait. Ilara's mind raced. Getting out was nearly impossible, but Vance's absence was a once-in-a-lifetime window. She spent the afternoon studying the staff patterns. The evening housekeeper left at 8. The night security guard did a perimeter check at 8:30, then usually watched sports in the service kitchen. There was a 10-minute window. At 8:45, wearing dark clothes and carrying the satchel, she slipped out of her suite. She moved not toward the main elevator, but to the service elevator used by the staff. It required a key, but she had stolen the housekeeper's pass card earlier, swapping it with a non-functional one from a drawer. The elevator descended to the sub-basement loading dock. From there, it was a matter of timing and nerve. She waited for a delivery truck to block the security camera's view, then darted out into the alley, merging into the pedestrian traffic on Madison Avenue. She felt a wild, terrifying thrill. She was out. Grand Central at night was a cathedral of echoes and shadows. Locker 734 was in a remote corridor near the suburban tracks. Her hands were slick with sweat as she fit the key. It turned. Inside was a small envelope, no documents, just a USB drive and a note. The audio file is the sword. The video file is the nuclear option. He can survive the scandal. He cannot survive the truth. Meet me at the Oyster Bar now. We have less than an hour before his system flags your absence. Celeste was waiting in a secluded booth, shrouded in shadow. She looked older, stripped of her glossy armor, her eyes sharp with vengeance. You took your time. What's on the drive? Ilara asked, sliding into the booth. Proof that your father's secret wasn't discovered by accident, Celeste said, her voice low and urgent. Vance had my father's media company dig it up for him over a decade ago. It was their first collaboration. My father provided the dirt. Vance executed the kill. They split the spoils of your family's company. The audio is a conversation between them, gloating about it. Ilara felt the floor tilt. The conspiracy was deeper, older, and the video. Celeste's face hardened. From the Swiss Institute, patient testimonials are one thing, surgical logs are another. He doesn't just send people there for therapy, he funds specific procedures, neural modulation, memory suppression, all experimental, all unapproved. The video shows a consent form for a procedure codenamed Project Phoenix. The patient description matches you, Ilara, age, background, psychological profile. The proposed treatment, full behavioral realignment to eliminate maladaptive independence traits and foster benefactor-oriented loyalty. He wasn't just planning to own you, he was planning to reprogram you. The horror was no longer abstract, it was clinical, it had a name and a barcode. Vance's obsession wasn't metaphorical, it was a surgical blueprint. He wasn't building a masterpiece, he was building a doll. Why are you giving this to me? Ilara breathed. Because I can't use it, Celeste said, bitterness etching her words. My family is complicit. If I release it, we go down with him. But you're the victim, the whistleblower, the daughter seeking justice. The press will crucify him for you. You take him down, and I get to walk away from the wreckage with what's left of my family's empire. It's a trade. It was a devil's bargain, but it was the only weapon sharp enough to kill a god. Ilara took the drive. How long before he knows I'm gone? Celeste checked her watch. His AI security system, Chimera, doesn't just monitor markets, it monitors his assets. That includes you. It flags anomalies in routine, biometric disengagement from the penthouse network. I'd say we have 20 minutes max before Jax is on the phone. They parted without another word. Ilara ran, not back to the penthouse, but into the bowels of the terminal. She needed a computer, a public one with no ties to her. She found an internet cafe a few blocks away, a grimy place with cubicles. She uploaded the audio and video files to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, set delayed emails to 3 major news outlets, and drafted a devastating social media thread ready to post. She created a dead man's switch. If she didn't reset a timer every 12 hours, everything would go live. As she finished, her burner phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered. Miss Finch, it was Jax. His voice was calm, but there was a tension underneath. Your biometrics show you're outside the approved perimeter. Mr. Vance is concerned. A car is waiting outside your current location to bring you home. Please don't make this difficult. He'd found her, of course he had. Vance's eyes were everywhere. She looked out the grimy window. A black SUV idled at the curb. 2 men in suits stood beside it. She had the weapons now, the satchel, the drive, the dead man's switch, but she was still in the labyrinth, and the Minotaur knew she was loose. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She could press send now, unleash chaos, but Vance was in Washington, surrounded by senators. A public meltdown here would give him time to spin, to hide, to deploy his legal army. She needed to face him, to see his face when the trap sprung. Tell Mr. Vance I'm ready to come home, she said into the phone, her voice eerily calm. And tell him I finally understand the rules of his game. She hung up, gathered her things, and walked out into the night toward the waiting car. Not as a victim, not as a project, but as a bomb disguised as a girl. The final move was hers. She just had to get close enough to detonate. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Jax drove, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. Ilara sat in the back, the satchel on her lap, her phone with its dead man's switch timer ticking down in her pocket. She wasn't scared anymore. She was resolved. The fear had been burned away in the internet cafe, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. She was no longer Thomas Finch's daughter or Alexander Vance's project. She was the consequence. Vance returned from Washington just after midnight. He entered the penthouse not with fury, but with the calm annoyance of a master finding a chess piece out of place. He found Ilara waiting for him in the library, standing before the fire, the satchel at her feet. You took a risk tonight, Ilara, he said, shrugging off his overcoat. The city is dangerous. Your biometrics went offline for 107 minutes. That creates uncertainty. I needed to think, she said, her voice steady. Without the sensors, without the algorithms predicting my cortisol levels, I needed to remember who I am. Vance poured himself a drink, a faint smile on his lips. The project was exhibiting advanced cognitive reasoning. Interesting. And who are you? Ilara Finch, she said, meeting his gaze. Daughter of Thomas Finch, the man you didn't just beat, the man you murdered. The smile vanished. A flicker of something dangerous passed behind his eyes. Your father took his own life, a tragic end to a poor business strategy. A strategy you engineered, she shot back. With Celeste's father, you used his media empire to dig up a buried secret. You used it as a lever. You gave him a choice, public ruin and prison, or a quiet death that left his family something. You didn't just want his company. You wanted him to choose his own erasure. That's not business, that's execution. Vance set his glass down slowly. The air in the room grew heavy, pressurized. You've been listening to stories from bitter old men. Your father was weak. Sentiment is a flaw in the system. I corrected it. And am I a flaw in the system, Alexander? She asked, taking a step forward. Is that what Project Phoenix was designed to correct? My maladaptive independence traits? The color drained from Vance's face. For the first time, the mask of complete control slipped. He hadn't anticipated this. The Swiss Institute was a black hole, information-proof. Where did you hear that name? From the consent form, the one with my profile on it, the one authorizing neural modulation to foster benefactor-oriented loyalty. You weren't saving me, you were planning to overwrite me. He recovered quickly, his expression hardening into granite. A speculative treatment plan for your own good, your trauma. Stop, the word cut through the air like a blade. You don't get to define my trauma, you caused it, and now I'm going to define your consequence. Vance laughed, a dry, hollow sound. And what consequence is that? You'll go to the press? With what? The ravings of a disgraced lawyer and stolen medical documents. I own the press. I own the courts. I own the narrative, Ilara. You are a subplot, a footnote. Ilara reached into the satchel. She pulled out the digital voice recorder Daniel Porter had given her. She pressed play. The tinny, aged audio filled the library. Two voices. One was Vance's, younger, sharper. The other was a gruff, older voice, Harrison Whitlock, Celeste's father. Whitlock, the girl is the key then, the steel man's soft spot. Vance, the soft spot is the leverage. You find the thing he loves most, and you show him how easily it can be taken. Then you offer him a way to protect it. That's how you win. Whitlock, and if he chooses the girl over his company. Vance, then I take the company anyway, and I still have the lever for the girl. It's a win-win. Vance's face was immobile, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. Ilara stopped the recording. That's not a business strategy. That's a confession to conspiracy, fraud, and emotional torture leading to a death. It connects you to Whitlock. It proves intent. You think a 20-year-old tape from a dead man will hold up? Vance sneered, but his eyes were calculating, scanning for an exit he couldn't see. It's not just the tape, Ilara said. She pulled out her phone, showing him the screen. It displayed the dead man's switch interface, the countdown at 11 hours and 42 minutes. It's the tape, the Project Phoenix files, the financials tracing back to the Swiss Institute, and a signed affidavit from Daniel Porter, all packaged and set to release to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the SEC in less than 12 hours, unless I enter a code to stop it. Vance stared at the phone. For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. He had been outmaneuvered, not by a rival corporation, not by a government, but by the variable he thought he controlled, the human element he'd failed to fully model. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice stripped of all its paternal condescension. It was flat, transactional. I want my life, Ilara said, not the one you designed, mine. First, you will transfer $50 million into an offshore account I control. That's the value of the life insurance you stole, adjusted for inflation and interest. 50 million is a rounding error for you. Second, you will sign over legal guardianship of the Finch Initiative, that fake charity you set up in my name to me, with full, autonomous control of its $200 million endowment. Vance's eyes narrowed. You're stealing from me. I'm reclaiming what was taken. Third, you will issue a public statement. You will admit your role in my father's downfall. You will not mention Whitlock. You will frame it as a past moral failing, a young man's ruthless ambition you now regret. You will announce the Finch Initiative as your act of personal atonement, with me as its independent director. You want me to commit professional suicide, he whispered, aghast. I want you to choose a controlled demolition over a nuclear explosion, she corrected. The narrative saves you, the proud, repentant titan. If you refuse the tape, the files, the video of that consent form, it all goes public. Your investors will flee. The Swiss authorities will investigate. The DOJ will have a field day. You'll lose everything. This way, you lose face and a fraction of your wealth. You keep your empire. He stood there, a king in his castle, dethroned by a pawn. The calculation was clear in his eyes. He was weighing the odds, the damage control. The humiliation was galactic, but the alternative was annihilation. And if I agree, he asked, you just walk away. Ilara smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. I walk into a boardroom. With your money, your apology, and your name temporarily attached to my cause, I will use it to build something for people like me. Real help, not surveillance. And you will never, ever look for me again. You will instruct Jax and every person on your payroll that I am now a competitor, not an asset. you will leave me alone." The silence stretched. Vance walked to the window, looking out at his kingdom of light. His shoulders, usually so straight, slumped almost imperceptibly. He had been checkmated by his own creation. "All right," he said, the word tasting like ash. "You have a deal." The following 72 hours were a blur of lawyers, encrypted transfers, and controlled media leaks. Vance's public apology was a masterpiece of crafted humility, broadcast on major networks. The financial world reeled. The story of the billionaire and the homeless girl who inspired his redemption became the talk of every outlet. Ilara Finch was photographed leaving the Vance Capitol building, dressed in a simple black suit, her head held high. The caption, "The heiress of second chances." Celeste and her father, spared from exposure by Ilara's deal, quietly dissolved the engagement and retreated from the spotlight, their alliance with Vance permanently fractured. Jax was given new orders. When he opened the car door for Ilara for the last time, he gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good luck, Miss Finch." "Thank you, Jax," she said, and she meant it. 6 months later, the Finch Initiative headquarters occupied a bright, renovated warehouse in Brooklyn. It wasn't a shelter. It was a holistic center offering housing, mental health care, legal aid, and job training for homeless women. Ilara's face was on the website, but she worked in the back, on strategy, on policy. She used Vance's money and her own lived experience to build a system that couldn't be gamed by a man like him. One evening, she was working late. A notification popped up on her secure laptop. It was an alert tied to a silent tracking program she'd had a white hat hacker friend install. It monitored for any digital trace, any financial query, any surveillance request related to her name or her father's. The alert read, "Query source, Vance Capital AI Chimera. Search parameters, Finch, Ilara current psychological profile assessment. Status, automated query. Result, firewalled and rerouted to dummy server. No data transmitted." He was still trying, old habits. The algorithm was still running, looking for a new angle, a new weakness. He couldn't help himself. Ilara didn't feel fear. She felt a grim satisfaction. She typed a command, sending a pre-written file to the dummy server. It was a single image, a screenshot of her dead man's switch interface, still active, with a new line added to the release package. Appendix Z, evidence of ongoing pattern of harassment and violation of settlement terms. 30 seconds later, a second alert flashed. Query terminated, source disengaged. She leaned back in her chair, looking at the city skyline through her window. The tallest tower still bore his name, lit up against the night. But in her small, warm office, surrounded by blueprints for a better world, she felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child in her father's study before the fall. She felt safe, not because a powerful man protected her, but because she had learned to protect herself, not by running, but by building a fortress of truth he couldn't breach. The girl from the doorway was gone. In her place was a woman who had looked a monster in the eye and not blinked, who had turned an obsession into a weapon and a weapon into a legacy. And as the lights of the city twinkled, one by one, the most surprising detail of all emerged. It wasn't in a headline or a bank statement. It was in the quiet of that room. Alexander Vance, the man who solved problems with contracts and zeros, had finally encountered a problem with no solution. Her name was Ilara, and she was just getting started. So what is the true cost of an obsession? For Alexander Vance, it was $50 million, a humiliating public apology, and the chilling realization that the one variable he could never fully control was human conscience. For Ilara Finch, the cost was her innocence, her safety, and any lingering belief that the world is a fair place. But the ledger doesn't end there. This story resonates because it taps into a deep modern anxiety, the fear of being consumed, not by a monster from a fairy tale, but by a system, an algorithm, a person with so much power that your life becomes data on their dashboard. We saw the research, the Cinderella complex, the psychological trap of wanting to be saved, often leaves people more dependent, not less. The billion-dollar romance industry sells the fantasy of rescue, but rarely shows the fine print of control. Ilara's story is the antidote to that fantasy. She wasn't saved. She fought her way out of a rescue that was really a cage. She used the predator's own tools, information, leverage, cold calculation to secure her freedom. She understood a fundamental truth. In a world of power imbalances, the only safe place is on the other side of the bargaining table. You don't plead for mercy from a king. You become a power he has to reckon with. The haunting question this leaves us with isn't about billionaires or homeless women. It's about the nature of power itself. Is it the ability to buy anything, to surveil anyone, to design lives like software? Or is true, unassailable power something else entirely? Is it the integrity that makes a starving girl return a diamond? Is it the resilience that lets her walk back into the lion's den, not as prey, but as a negotiator with a bomb in her pocket? Vance had all the power in the world, but he was enslaved by his need to possess. Ilara had nothing, but she was free because she had nothing left to lose except herself, and she refused to lose that. In the end, the ring was just a MacGuffin, a shiny object that set two opposing forces on a collision course. One force was consumption, the urge to own, to control, to reshape the world in one's own image. The other force was sovereignty, the unbreakable will to own oneself. We watch these stories to see which force wins. Tonight, sovereignty won, but the battle never really ends. It just changes address. What did you think? Was Ilara's deal with Vance a true victory, or did letting him walk away with his empire intact mean she lost? Could you have walked into that penthouse for a final confrontation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The psychology of power dynamics is something we can all learn from. If this story of a girl who outplayed the most powerful man in the room gripped you, please hit that like button. It tells the algorithm you want more content like this. Share this with a friend who loves a tale about turning the tables, and make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We explore the dark corners of ambition, obsession, and the human spirit every week. Thanks for watching.